Welcome back to the Strategy YouTube channel. For the first time in my YouTube career, I've been challenged by another YouTube channel called the Cardboard Junkies to a friendly deck building competition. We both came up with a deck theme that we thought would make for an interesting and unique commander deck and then challenged the other to build it. If you would like to see their video in which I challenge them to make a mono blue -1/-1 counter deck, click on the link in the description below, and while you're there, check out their other videos on Commander. Zenny, one of the creators for the Cardboard Junkies channel, challenged me to build an Izzet landfall deck. I accepted the challenge partly because I don't actually own an Izzet deck, and I never have. Some color pairings seem to have an issue where they become associated with a certain playstyle or strategy, and they have a hard time escaping that stereotype. And I think Izzet has this problem the worst of all. It seems like 99% of Izzet commanders fall into one of two themes: either Spellslinger decks or Artifact Synergy. As I've said in the past, I'm a bit of a contrarian and like to do things that most people haven't seen before. This makes Izzet a very difficult color combination to build around for me. That being the case, when I accepted this challenge, I already knew in my mind that I wasn't going to build around much Artifact Synergy, and I was going to avoid Spellslinger strategies. That doesn't leave a lot to work with in the Izzet colors, but as we'll see, there are surprisingly a lot of tricks this color pair can pull off. When looking through the landfall synergy cards that we can run in our deck, there wasn't too many to pick from. By siphoning down all of the landfall cards that didn't seem value enough to play in EDH, however, I found an interesting sub-theme. There were actually a handful of landfall cards that interacted with creatures on the board by tapping them or otherwise making them unable to block. Some of the more powerful and mana-intensive land creatures can goad our opponent's creatures for us. Still, there weren't enough creatures in the goad theme alone to commit to it while also claiming that this deck is a landfall deck. Instead, however, we could say that our landfall deck has a sub-theme of cards that manipulate creatures on the board in some way or coerce combat. That might just sound like goad, but unfortunately with the cards available to us, many of them do not prevent our opponents from attacking us like a goad deck normally would. So unlike a goad deck, we need to be prepared to defend ourselves against these agitated creatures. When deciding on the commander for this deck, the obvious choice seemed to be Firecrag, Cunning Instigator. This dragon does a little bit of everything we need. It goads creatures our opponents control, draws us cards, and increases its power as a win condition. While playtesting this deck, however, I realized that defending ourselves in the early game is a serious issue for us. The theme of this deck makes it awkward to fit 1 and 2 drop ramp in our deck, since we're trying to move away from artifacts while embracing ramping lands onto the battlefield as much as possible. This meant that often while waiting to cast our commander, our board position was lagging behind further than Firecrag could catch up. Knowing this, I decided I need a commander who would benefit this deck in the early game as a way to cope with that weakness. My next thought was Red Death, Shipwrecker. This commander puts a creature on the board early to deter attackers. It goads our opponent's creatures for us, and it acts as a consistent mana dork on turn 2. Unfortunately, this commander has issues too. Our land base utilizes a lot of lands that tap for colorless mana, meaning it's fairly difficult to consistently cast our commander on turn 2. Also, our commander's tap ability allows our opponents to draw cards, which is not ideal. Plus, the goad ability in this early part of the game isn't very relevant since there isn't many powerful creatures on the battlefield. We also can't tap our commander for mana unless an opponent has a creature we can target with Red Death's ability. On top of all that, most of our best cards cost 3 mana, meaning ramping on turn 2 to reach 4 doesn't usually benefit us. This leads to version 3 of this deck, which utilizes a commander I have often thought of as very good and deserving more attention. Denethor Stoneseer gives us the best of both worlds. He can consistently be played on turn 2 and block attackers for us as a way to deter aggro. He only needs blue mana, meaning we don't need to have our colors fixed by turn 2, and his second ability acts as both an incentive to attack our opponents and a way to remove something. Plus, if we need a card draw desperately, we can use that ability to make ourselves the monarch in a pinch. Denethor's ability to make an opponent the monarch aligns perfectly with our vision of combat and creature manipulation for this deck. We need to coerce our opponents to attack each other instead of us. One of the ways ways that we can do this is by playing curses. If we give an opponent a curse that benefits people who attack them, it will be a motivator, especially in the early game, for players to attack someone else. We don't need to go too heavily into this theme, especially considering our commander will act as a pretty decent blocker against the very first attacking creatures of each game. And we can also make an opponent the monarch, which will encourage our other opponents to attack them and continue a cycle of violence back and forth. Another way we can deter our opponents from attacking us and incentivizing them to attack our opponents is by playing a little bit of a pillow fort theme. If you're unfamiliar, pillow fort is a strategy where you bunker down to defend yourself from your opponents as much as possible. You reach a critical mass of deterrence for them so that they're unlikely to attack you successfully. By playing cards like Propaganda, we'll dissuade our opponent's attacks. We can also use Eternity Vessel to keep our life total relatively high so that our opponents never feel like they could take us out in one turn. Now you might be asking yourself, how are we going to win if we aren't using Spellslinger combos and we're keeping our creatures back to block for us? Well, there's one more useful sub-theme I found in Is It Landfall creatures, and that's pinging each opponent whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control. By playing our pinging creatures and protecting them behind our pillow fort and coercion tactics, we can slowly whittle all of our opponents down at the same time. And because all of our pinging landfall creatures are red and pinging in 1 damage bursts, we can use cards like Gearsenstarn, Kellermorph, or Oger Axonal, Deepest Might to boost the damage for each ping. This way our opponents are getting lightning bolted to the face every time we play our land for turn, rather than just taking the one. And there are plenty of ways to get more than just 1 land each turn. Even though we're trying to avoid artifact synergies, there are a good number of colorless cards that can cheat lands onto the battlefield. Cards like Walking Atlas will give us an additional landfall trigger each turn, which will be huge for our game plan. On the more mana intensive side, we have some creatures like Patron of the Moon that can put out multiple lands in a turn, giving us multiple landfall triggers. If that wasn't enough, we also have a few one-time use cards that can give us 5 or more landfall triggers in a turn. And because we have so many colorless effects that put lands onto the battlefield, we can also take advantage of cards like Rings of Brighthearth to give us multiple copies of that ability, searching additional lands every time. Not to mention our deck has several effects that allow us to return lands to our hand so that we can replay them again later to activate multiple landfall triggers. This way we'll constantly have an influx of multiple lands a turn without ever having to worry about running out of lands in hand. While our deck is designed to be able to gain some benefit from this, most decks are not, which is why we're running cards like Storm Cauldron and Mana Breach. Both of these cards will give us lands back into our hand so that we can replay them, while punishing our opponents by forcing them to return their lands to hand too. There's even an infinite combo with Storm Cauldron, Tiller Engine, and Patron of the Moon, where we can use the Patron's ability to put lands from the hand onto the battlefield, which will enter untapped thanks to Tiller Engine, allowing us to pay the price to activate the ability again. Storm Cauldron will return those lands to hand, allowing us to play the lands and return it to hand over and over and over again, generating infinite mana and triggering infinite landfall triggers. This deck was not designed around that combo, I just found it while building with all those cards already in the deck. Still, it's good to have in your back pocket if the game runs long and we need something to end it. Just in case plan A doesn't work out, our deck also has some backup win conditions. Valakut Exploration can do some serious damage in this deck, though it won't benefit from some of the damage boosters because it's not doing 1 damage at a time. Cavalier of Flames can wipe out all of our opponents in one huge blast, assuming our graveyard is full when it dies. And there are plenty of other combos and synergies in here between cards you might not have ever thought would go in an Is It Landfall deck, so definitely check out the deck list and the link in the description. And also make sure to check out what the Cardboard Junkies have been cooking. I'm personally super excited to see how that mono blue -1/-1 counter deck turned out over at the Cardboard Junkies YouTube channel. I'm sure I'm gonna have something to say, so look for me in the comments of that video. Thank you Cardboard Junkies for the awesome collab, suggestion, and great deck ideas. And thank you and the rest of the audience for continuing to support my channel as we grow. Thank you again for watching. Oh, hey, sorry, before the video ends, I actually do have a couple more things I wanted to talk about. First, I just want to reiterate and give some props to Cardboard Junkies because they were really cool people to work with. They were super kind and approachable, and they had a bunch of great ideas. Super nice content creators. I couldn't have asked for a better group to start collabing with. On that same note, you know, there might be more more collabs in the future, maybe with Cardboard Junkies or maybe with a group of people, who knows. How did you like this sort of thing? I've never done it before. I kept thinking of like the Jimmy Timmy Power Hour from Nickelodeon, if anybody remembers that. So I was kind of channeling that in the thumbnail and also like the whole vibe. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. Another thing to bring up, the Zerda subscriber special video. I said that video was going to be released in February, and it sounds really dumb, but I was thinking that I would crank it out this weekend in addition to this video I just made that you're watching right now. I forgot that February only has 28 days. I was thinking it was going to be February 30th tomorrow, and then I could make this wonderful Zerda video and get it up there. But you know, time doesn't work that way apparently. So expect the Zerda video pretty soon. Sorry that February was kind of light on the content. One thing I had been working on though, and this was my third point, is I want to sort of rebrand the channel a little bit. You know, I love the name Strategy in theory, but there's a couple things wrong with it. The first of which is every time somebody tries to look up my YouTube channel by name, it always gets auto-corrected to Strategy. And so I thought I was super clever with my cool funky YouTube channel name, but now I'm starting to realize that it's genuinely harming the entire channel and making it more annoying for people to find my videos if they're interested in them. Not to mention it's kind of hard to remember. So I've been playing around with some new channel images and a new name. Sadly, the Blood Moon Ib Half Heart little channel picture that everyone knows and loves, I think its time in the sun is faded. But I think I've come up with a pretty cool idea and I'm pretty excited about it, so stay tuned for that. And yeah, thank you very much for watching and always being so great. I hope you have a great weekend. Okay, bye.